Hey, what's up? My name's Cameron and this is Design Based, a channel where I talk about everything design. Today's video is a bit of a new style where I just recorded some work I was already doing and now I'm going to give you some insight into the process and show you what I actually did. So this video is about Cyberpunk 2077, which is a new game that's coming out soon and I'm super stoked for it. But what I'm doing is kind of making my own logo for a little side hustle we're working on with Jacob that you saw last week. And while it's not going to be a direct replica of the Cyberpunk logo, we're going to take some inspiration from it and that style. So if you're looking for a tutorial or how to recreate the Cyberpunk logo, this probably isn't the video for you. If you just want some insight into my process and to see how I use inspiration, this will be an awesome video, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. So a kind of good first question to ask here is, what is Cyberpunk? And there's two answers to that question. Firstly, Cyberpunk is a kind of fiction genre that's been around for a while. So according to the first definition on Google, it's a genre of science fiction set in a lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by computer technology. And according to the second definition, that means that it's science fiction in a dystopian futuristic setting. So you've probably seen a lot of images like this before, kind of the downtown Tokyo, super dark with bright lights feel, and maybe the characters have some cyborg features or some mechanical limbs, and I think that's super cool. And then what I'm using as the definition of cyberpunk here and kind of moving forward with it is the game Cyberpunk 2077. So obviously it uses this cyberpunk art style, but it just makes it into a really cool open world game, and I'm super excited to see it. I'll throw some images up now just so you can kind of get a sense of it and just see how cool it truly looks. But how does this relate to me? Well, honestly, I'm just super stoked for it, and alongside Jacob, who you might have seen in last week's upload, we're gonna work on a little cyberpunk community and a bit of a news site. So we want our own logo and branding for that. So we don't really want to rip off cyberpunk, but we do want to take some good inspiration from it. So let's start by looking at what kind of branding Cyberpunk 2077, the game, has right now. So if we look at their actual logo, there are a few things that stand out. Firstly, it's just a super kind of sharp and bright logo, and it really is bold and in your face. It also definitely does look kind of hand-drawn or sprawled onto something rather than being an actual font. It is quite chaotic and sharp, and this is just something you wouldn't really find in type with the overlapping letters. You can see that it has some kind of grit to it, so there's a bit of the blue peeking out from behind the yellow, just adding some texture, which is a bit like authentic and dystopian, but also just a bit technological, so some match like that. And then moving down into the 2077 on the mark, that really just has some mono kind of futury tech vibes, and that's another huge part of cyberpunk and another kind of design style we can pull forward going into that. And then looking at some more inspiration, they have something called Night City Wire, and that's kind of the thing ran by Projekt Red, which is the developers of the game, just kind of some information, some interviews about the game, and just kind of hyping it up and revealing a little more to the viewers. So looking at the design for it, we see some more handwritten type, but this is done in a different style. This is kind of like the sprawled on, running out of ink marker style, and in the background you can see some dripping paint. It's just kind of a super cool mix of tech and just traditional physical mediums. So this is what we're going to try to capture going forward into the branding. In terms of the type that we're going to work with, it's going to be quite close to the cyberpunk logo style, but we are going to bring some more of that kind of natural grit that the other one has, and hopefully they'll combine quite well and look super cool. So let's get into that. I'm going to start by doing this on paper and physically, just because I do want it to look physical, and the best way to do that is just to do it. If you don't want to do this, there are some fonts, or you could make it yourself with shapes and add some grit, but I'm a huge proponent of, instead of mimicking it, just do the thing. So I'm going to have a montage playing right now, which is just going to be me sketching out some of the logo, and then I'll get back to you when I'm scanning them. So there we have it. I did some sketching and I chose to use kind of a marker that was already running out of ink, and by the end it was pretty much actually out of ink, but that just helped add some more kind of grit and texture to it and give it more of that hand drawing feel that I was looking to capture. Now is the point where if you have a scanner, just throw it in there and turn it on. But if you're me, I don't think I have a scanner. I might in a different room unplugged, but if you've ever tried to turn on a printer for the first time, that will take hours of making noise. So I opted for my phone, and if you use an iPhone, I learned something pretty cool a while ago that I actually had no clue about. I tried all sorts of free scanning apps, those all sucked. But actually built into the iPhone and built into Notes, there's a super good way to scan notes. So I'll throw that up on the screen here now. If you open your notes, you can press the camera button and actually scan a document, and then that's going to be super helpful because it's just no third-party apps and it actually works super well. So you'll see here, I didn't even really worry about the lighting. It's not too good of a way to capture it, but just enough where I know my mark's not going to be distorted and it's all going to be in one color. Then crop it to it just so it has the right size of paper and it's going to interpret your mark the right way. And then from there, it'll pretty much automatically scan it as if it were a scanner, but also a picture. So first it starts out as just a full color picture, but depending what you want, you can change it to grayscale, black and white, which is going to be the bitmap, so it's only going to have black or white, and just different things like that. You can just save that, and then from your notes, it'll just have it perfectly scanned in as a PDF. So I went ahead and sent that to myself, and now it's ready to go on my computer, scanned in, and for what I'm using, it's just as good as if I used an actual scanner. So now I'm going to open that in Photoshop, and we're going to do some basic touch-ups just to see how we can get it looking exactly how I want. So then after scanning it, what I did was bring it into Photoshop just so I can touch it up a little bit more and just get it looking exactly how I want. So the first thing I did was kind of change the levels and pretty much just make it the right brightness and darkness. So I wanted to make it almost a little more that bitmappy scanned look where it's pretty much just all the ink is black, but just keep some texture around the edges. So I played with the levels there. And then after that, I just wanted to clean up a little things I didn't love too much about the mark, and luckily that's quite easy to do. So on the T of the logo, I tried out a kind of double stroke style, but it really didn't work out. So I just did a bit of clipping it around, adding the brush back, and just getting a bit more of that texture there. But essentially, if you're not me and you didn't know I photoshopped this, it looks the exact same as the handheld thing. Keeps that hand-drawn feel, but it's a little more perfect and just a little more touched up how I was looking. So I played around with the top of the R, the top of the T, but overall I'm quite happy with it. Ended up deciding too that the O looked a little open and a little too much like a U, but luckily that is easy to fix still, so I actually copied some of the rest of the mark, and that keeps the organic feel. But essentially what I'm doing here in Photoshop is just prepping it so I can bring it into Illustrator, and then I'm going to use the great image trace feature. And one of the things that image tracing is best for is things like this hand lettering and turning it into vector logos. So once this is all ready and looking how I want it, I'm just going to bring it into Illustrator, and then we'll pick back up right there. So then once I was happy with how I had everything looking in Photoshop, I copy pasted it over to Illustrator, where I went ahead and image traced it. Now here there are all sorts of settings and different ways you can do this, and it just depends on the project or the feel you want. Because I want it to look like the Cyberpunk logo and I want it to look like a one color feel, I went ahead and did just that and made it so it's one color and ignoring the white, so it's only gonna be the black, and then just adjusting the fine settings, just fine tuning it, and you can really play with this all sorts and just get it exactly how you want, but just changing the amount of detail that's preserved and how dark the blacks get and everything, just fine tuning it and playing around. So you'll see I made a couple versions here, including some that had more than one shade of black, which looks really good, and if you wanted more of like a watercolor or to actually resemble the original sketch, this would look great. In the end I decided on a simplified-ish one that kept a lot of the detail, but still kept it quite clean, and that worked super well for me. So again, some more fine tuning and just playing around with it, and now that it's all vectors, it's super easy. So you'll see here some stuff like the angle of the T and the R I just played with forever. So then I just played with all sorts of stuff. I simplified the paths a little just to, again, make it a little more simplistic, and my primary goal for this is to work as kind of an avatar on sites, so detail is good and it's gonna add that texture, but if we have too much detail, you're not really gonna be able to see any of it, and if it's way too detailed, you might actually kind of lose the edges of the forms when it's that small. So I want just enough that it shows and you can tell there's some roughness, but we don't really need to see all of the details. And then I went ahead and kind of compared it to the original Cyberpunk logo and what I was looking for, and found a few things that maybe could be changed. So one thing was the angle. If you look at the Cyberpunk logo, it has quite a kind of almost Metallica logo logo look where it has the ends both going out and a bit more perspective, so the bottom is closer in the foreground, and I wanted to capture a little more of that. And again, luckily now that the way we've done it, it's super easy, so I can just kind of shear it, transform it, and get it looking exactly how I want there. Keep playing around with all the letter positions, and that is pretty much how I got the word report done. Now if I was making this into the actual Cyberpunk logo, I'd probably copy it into Photoshop now, maybe experiment with some more grit and add in a blue layer, a yellow layer, put a bit of textures on, distort it a little, but I'm not doing that. So I want this logo to work well on social media, and it's going to be a logo that might end up being on things like websites and other things like that, so I'm going to keep it vector, and I'm just going to keep it one color too, because that's going to work best for my use. So now I'm just moving ahead to kind of what supports this mark, and our project's name is going to be Night City Report, and Night City is just the name of the city that Cyberpunk the game takes place in, so it's just going to be the name of our reporting blog that just talks about all the news and everything new we hear, some tips and tricks once it comes out, and everything like that. I decided I don't want night and city to also be this hand-drawn look. I think that's just gonna kind of push it too far in that direction. Instead, it's gonna be more of that monotype, the kind of futuristic, computery type that's just gonna work super well. Because my mark is gonna have to live on in kind of a square or circle, I'm gonna stack it up, so it's gonna have night on top, city in the middle, and then report on the bottom, and it should work well. So I just kind of look through, find some mono fonts that work, and I used a couple throughout, but actually ended up changing it right at the end just to a different kind of techie font, but really just working on a stack that works and kind of comparing it against some Cyberpunk content and seeing how that goes. And then by that point I kind of have a good idea of how it's looking and how the mark's looking, but I do want to design a little more of a design system for it, and here I actually decide that I'll go with yellow as the background color, with a bit of white just for some accents and design, and the text is just going to be bold and black on top, and that's largely just so it'll feel cyberpunk and kind of resemble the other accounts and make sense within that community, and also allows for a lot of brightness, as well as kind of bringing in some background elements like we saw in the first example that I showed. So I experimented with a couple kind of general vaporwave styles, like some lines, kind of the sunset horizon, but I didn't really love those, and then I ended up deciding that an awesome way to do the background would be to trace some of this city, because obviously that's what's in the name, that's what's in the game, and it's just super relevant. So here I am just tracing some of the light from the buildings in the city, and you might be wondering, yeah, okay, it's not really the most accurate representation, nobody's gonna tell that's the city, and that's exactly the point. I just wanted something that is gonna be abstract and work well as a background, but have a bit of meaning and relation and just make sense there. So I did a lot of fine-tuning with that, placing it there, and in the end I'm quite satisfied with how it looks, just like kind of a buildingy cityscape, but it still looks too perfect in the end. So I added some roughened shapes, and that really helps some of the text stand out and kind of break it up, make it feel a little more blotchy and weathered and a little more dystopian. So that works great and makes sense there. I also decided to go online and find some grunge texture to go on top, and that again just helps it be a little more weathered, dystopian, and futuristic, and just feel a little more like cyberpunk and a little less perfect. Now I know some people don't like using stuff from the internet and free downloads, but I mean, we just did the same process you would if you wanted some grit, which would be scanning something in, image tracing it, but I don't want to do that right now, and there's so much free stuff that already exists and is going to work perfectly, so I have nothing against going online. I just grabbed a couple cool grit textures I found and played around with them until they worked how I wanted, and I had a pretty solid logo. So then here we are, with a bit more refinement, I ended up at this final mark, which I'm pretty happy with, and then just put it together into kind of a little presentation that you guys could see. So you'll see that it has a lot of the features I talked about before, and it really does just combine that futuristic tech with a bit more of the dystopian grunge. The way it was made, I think it's going to work quite well no matter where I use it, so that was one big consideration. It will be in things as small as icons or profile pictures, which you see mocked up in the top right, but it'll also maybe be on banners, and hey, who knows, it could even be on posters or anything in the future. So just wanted to keep it open, scalable, and just something that could make sense and work at a lot of different sizes or uses or background. So primarily it's going to be this black on yellow, but it works just as fine with the yellow or white on black. And really here what I did was just kind of wanted the Night City mark to look kind of like just some general future, but with the report scrawled on top, so it's on just a bit of an angle just to give it a little more dynamicism and a little more interest. And then you'll see just in the profile picture with the background, you really can't recognize the fact I traced the buildings or tell what it is, but it just adds a little more depth and style and just makes it look way more appealing than it could have otherwise. I also just separated out the report mark and the Night City just to show off, but you've seen me make those and they make a lot of sense. But overall, I'm super happy with with this. It's just a really fun and cool, interesting mark that just captures the vibe of Cyberpunk and some of their design system while still being its own thing and not directly just stealing from it. So I'm super happy with that turned out, and hopefully you'll see this logo plastered around the web a little more in the future. Alright, so there we have it. That was some insight into kind of my process and how I created this Night City Report mark. If you're interested in Cyberpunk like I am, you may want to check out some more about Night City Report, so I will leave some links to that in the description, and it should be lots of fun and a great community. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you do give it a like and subscribe to my channel. It'll help me out so much. Let me know what you're looking most forward to in Cyberpunk. For me, it's just the open world city that's going to be a ton of fun to explore and see all the hidden things they have. Otherwise, I hope you're having an awesome day and go design something great.